Welcome to Specific Love. This is the 5th edition of 20 tips and tricks for your workshop. Let's begin. Now our first tip comes from our awesome viewer named Barry Carey. He said whenever you're using paint or stain and you have the lid off, there's a good chance you're just going to take the brush, you're going to dip it inside and rub the excess off on the surrounding top here. Unfortunately, that's going to get a bunch of residue down into this groove, which is meant to help seal the lid. So first off, take a little bit of tape and just put a little bit of tape around that top edge, just like so. And then when you're dipping the brush and rubbing it off, it's either going to fall right back in the can or it's going to be on top of this tape. And you don't have to worry about it getting down in that groove. So then take your tape off, throw it away, and put your lid on it. And now you know it's going to be fully sealed. Now whenever it's winter time and I'm in my shop, I need a heater going. But a lot of heaters, like this one, make a lot of noise, whether it's just a fan or some type of radiating system to push the heat out. It's just noisy. And I already make enough noise in my shop. I don't want something additional. Plus, I'm doing camera work and I can't have additional hums going in the background. So, let me show you a tip. Now, I definitely suggest one of these type of heaters. This is a quartz heater and actually puts off quite a bit of heat without making hardly any noise. Let's listen. It's almost perfectly silent. Yet this is getting quite warm. I need to move away a little bit. There is a piece of metal in the background, if you can see back in there, that is actually help reflect out the heat. So it is pushing out a bunch of heat and is very, very quiet. So I definitely suggest if you're going to use a heater, particularly a floor heater, get one that's a quartz heater that doesn't have any noise. Now I just recently saw this and I had to share it. Let me show you a quick way to draw circles around a dead center point. First off, you need a long, thin nail. You want to put it in the center. Tap it in, make sure it's sticking straight up if possible. Then you want to choose a distance on your measuring tape, whatever you might need. Lock it in place. Hook the actual corner here around the nail. Take your pencil and you want to hook it over here in the end of the measuring tape. And then just quickly start drawing your circle. Then you can make a quick adjustment if needed. And draw some additional ones. There you go, quick way to draw some circles. Now feather boards are nothing new on a table saw. In fact, they usually hook up into the slots right here and made out of plastic or wood. I recently purchased this version that uses magnets. Great thing about it, it's so easy to put in place, and then with just a couple turns, it is now locked in place. It allows you to use one direction, but not the other. To undo this, you just quickly turn those knobs back and boom, it is released. Now, this right here I purchased recently and I'll put a link to it in the description below if you're interested, so check it out. I just recently upgraded my table saw, but if you still have an old one, sometimes it's a little difficult to align your fence with your blade. It can be a little bit crooked and not make the wood exactly right. Well, here's a little tip to help align that real quickly. Now on your table saw, you should have a groove cut into the top of this, and that should be in direct alignment with the blade. Now, I have set up this fence so that it'll be right at 4.5 inches from the blade. But to check to make sure it is the same in the front and back, we need to come out here and check what the measurement is, and this is 9 7/8. So let's move this over here, 9 7/8, and back here, 9 7/8. As long as the fence here is lined up front and back at 9 7/8 to this groove, it should cut nice and straight. Keep watching and I'll tell you how you have a chance to be featured in a future video. If you use regular round pencils in your shop, there's a good chance you're going to set them down and, well, it just rolls off onto the floor and you can't find it. So a quick way to solve that is grab some tape, tear you off a piece, put it around the top here, leave a little tab sticking out, and now you don't have to worry about that going anywhere. Have you ever wanted to work on a project, but you wanted a piece of lumber or a piece of wood that is basically not free? Here's a trick on how to find those. Instead of going just to your standard 2x4s or 2x6s, go look at the 2x10s and even the 2x12s and look at those in the really long lengths. And the reason being is those are usually cut from much larger trees, and therefore there's a good chance you're getting more of the center section of the tree than the outer edge. And that way you can basically get a piece of lumber like this that is not free. Then trim these down to the size that you need, and there you go. A great piece of wood for a great project. Now for this tip, you're gonna have to use your imagination just a little bit. Now let's say you're up framing a house and you have the roof structure coming and you want to put an end piece on it, but you just have one of those boards that is just a little bit warped and it just does not want to line up straight. So you're pushing down on this and trying to push up on this one, and your hands, well, you don't have enough hands to get it to work. So let me show you a great tip to fix this. Now whichever board is the low side, you want to take a screw and a drill and you want to screw it almost all the way in. But you leave a little bit sticking out here. Then you take a hammer and you get right in there, and that'll allow you to push down on this one, pull up on this one. You want everything in alignment, and now you can add some screws. Here recently I built a bench to go around my fire pit. Now it is outside in the elements and well, it's sitting directly on the ground. So if you're gonna do that, you need to remember a couple things. One, of course, use either cedar that's rot resistant, or you wanna use pressure treated wood. Now in both cases, take some type 3 glue and just go across the bottom of all of those contact points with the ground. And once that is fully cured, because it is waterproof, type 3 that is, it should help prevent excess water from seeping into the wood and rotting it quicker. Now, I just recently went out and checked that bench and it's still looking great on the bottom of all those legs. If you plan on burning some of your wood for that custom dark charcoal type finish, here's some tips. First off, you want to start off on one end of the wood, completely off, and then work your way till you're completely off the other end. Then move up a little bit and repeat the process. You don't want to go back and forth across the wood, otherwise you're going to have all these little freckles and it'll just look blotchy when you're done. So, start off one end, go all the way across, move up a little bit, and go all the way back across again. It's a slow process, but it will look great. By chance, do you have any tips and tricks that you'd like to share? Put those in the comments below and there's a good chance you might be featured in a future video. Now if you ever buy the paint in the large gallons and you use most of it, but not all of it, let's just say you have a little bit left. If you keep it stored in these gallon containers, all this excess air here can dry this out much quicker. Plus this is just a lot of wasted space. Instead, consider using a mason jar. You can easily label it with some tape. You can see what's in it real easily because it's clear, and the lid can close airtight. Plus, it takes up a lot less space. So if you have a little bit of paint left, consider putting it in a mason jar. If you have dust collection, specifically the bucket type, a lot of times it is hard to tell exactly how full this is without having to crack this open and potentially getting dust everywhere. Here's a little tip. If you take a hole saw, about a 2-inch size, and you cut a hole right near the top, but not all the way up, then get you a plastic, about the type of like a face mask. It's real thin and flexible, but still really firm. Cut out a section of this, and you want to glue it onto here. Now make sure it is fully sealed because you don't want to lose any suction around that. And there you go, that's an easy little sight hole so you know exactly how full your bucket is. If you've ever worked much with MDF, you know if you're trying to use CA glue to glue a joint together, specifically on the end here, it's not going to want to adhere very well because the CA glue quickly absorbs into it and doesn't create a very strong joint. Well, here's a little tip for you. If you take some thin CA glue and you pour it right on the edge here, give it a little bit of time to dry, it'll soak in quickly, but it'll still create a nice little barrier. And once that is fully cured, then takes the regular medium stuff, put a layer of that on, and then glue it together, and that should create a much stronger joint. Sometimes when you're working with wood, you unfortunately will have a knot in a key location. You want to fill that in so it doesn't have that rough feeling to it, and a good suggestion would be to use some CA glue, particularly brown or black. And Starbond here has these nice little applicators that you can easily get right into those grooves and fill those in so to be nice and even across. I bring up Starbond because I have a 15% discount code, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. Now for those of you who don't know, most woodworking tools can also cut thin aluminum. This is right about 1/8 of an inch, which might be a little bit thick, but this little tiny bandsaw blade should be able to cut it just fine. And just to show you that it has not dulled the blade yet, I'm going to cut some wood right after it. Whenever you're cutting firewood with a chainsaw, sometimes it can be hard to get consistent cuts or consistent lengths from it. Well, here's a little tip for you. When you're cutting, actually use the length of the blade as your measuring tool. For example, this is an 18-inch blade. You don't necessarily have to make 18-inch long pieces, but you can come up here to about the letter A and have about 12. For example, measure your wood, you know roughly about where to make that cut. Make it, go to the next piece, and so on. And you'll usually come within an inch or two of all your pieces of wood. Pressure treated wood is really good for outside projects, but because of its high moisture content, be careful of storing it, specifically on concrete. I recently had some stored in a nice section, had several of them piled together, and it sat there for probably about a month. When I went to move it, I had a nice strip of mold now growing on my concrete. So be careful where you store pressure treated wood, give it a little bit of air in between each piece, and hopefully it won't do that to you. Whenever you're trying to align a piece of wood against a wall, especially one that has imperfections like this here, it can sometimes be a little bit hard to get that exact cut going in there. That is, unless you take a washer and you take a pencil and you run it along the wall here, and that'll help you create a nice little outline of where you need to make your cuts. Now with this outline, you can cut and sand really close to where the wall is actually going to be shaped, and that way you can have a nice clean fit. Card scrapers are awesome, but sometimes you don't have them on hand, or maybe the project you're using is really small. That's when a razor blade can come in handy. First off, take a hard screwdriver and you want to burnish the edge of your blade here, and then you can use it as a very small card scraper. Have you ever been out to your car and you put your key in and it is just frozen? Or maybe you're trying to get into the house and the same problem. Here's a little tip. Take a little hand sanitizer and put it on the key and stick it in the lock. It might take just a little bit of time for it to thaw, but it should help. And I mean, really, who doesn't have hand sanitizer now? And there's another 20 tips and tricks that I hope you can use in your shop. Now, if by chance you have any other ideas, remember, put those in the comments and there's a chance you might be featured in a future video. Otherwise, get out and shop and have fun building. Pressure treated good is pressure treated good. Here's a little quick trick. Let me show you. Might help if I plug it in. Firewood. Should I tell you, stop pointing your finger. Oh, you're still recording. You suck.